Greetings and welcome to the channel. It's Mikhailov from Team Retro, where we like retro games and the devices that bring them to us. So I was able to get my hands on a Nintendo Switch 2 on day of release. I pre-ordered it about a month and a half ago whenever the pre-orders went live. I think it was early May, and I was able to get one through Walmart. Now the Switch 2 is very different from what I cover on this channel. This is a major console release, and it's actually the first major console that I'm covering at launch on this channel. So I want to see what makes the Nintendo Switch 2 better than the Switch 1, and I want to see how this holds up not just as a retro gaming device, but also as a brand new console release. So in this video, we're going to take the Nintendo Switch 2, we're going to put it through its paces, we're going to do a little bit of testing, we're going to do some comparisons, and we're going to see if the Nintendo Switch 2 is worth your hard-earned dollar bucks. So let's dive in and get to work. At time of recording, you can order the Switch 2 from pretty much every major retailer. However, your mileage may vary as far as availability goes. The unit I'm showing was actually pre-ordered and purchased through Walmart, and that's the link that I'll have in the description. It's time to hop on our mount and ride into Spec Town. The Nintendo Switch 2 is powered by a custom NVIDIA processor. The GPU is also customized by NVIDIA specifically for the Switch 2. The device has 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. The device comes with 256 gigabytes of onboard storage with expansion via a MicroSD express card slot. The screen is a 7.9-inch LCD screen with a resolution of 1920 by 1080 and a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. The screen has HDR10 support and VRR up to 120 Hz. Giving the device life is a 5220 mAh battery. For connectivity, this handheld has Wi-Fi 6 built in, as well as Bluetooth. The device ships with Nintendo's proprietary operating system. It's time to unbox the unit, and there's a lot to unpack here. Opening up the device will reveal the system itself and the new Joy-Con 2 controllers. Underneath is the new Joy-Con connector for docked mode, a USB-C charger and cable, and finally, the dock itself. Alright, let's go ahead and tour the device, and let's take a look at what makes the Nintendo Switch 2's hardware. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start actually right here at the front, where you have a 7.9-inch LCD panel. Now, this isn't an OLED panel as what was in the Steam Deck OLED, and we're going to talk about those screen comparisons in a little bit. But my initial impressions are that this screen is fine. I really didn't see an issue with color saturation, and it doesn't seem like a bad panel to me. In all the games I've played, I haven't really noticed or seen any issues with ghosting or any other type of frame rate or VRR issues. It's a serviceable panel. To me, it looks pretty good, but if you are more sensitive to things like frame rate or PWM flickering or something like that, then yeah, maybe this would be a bit of a deterrent, but for me personally, I actually don't have an issue with this panel. Now let's move to the top of the device, where you have the power button and your volume rockers. You have a light sensor right here that's for auto brightness, and then you have your exhaust here at the top. You have a USB-C port here at the top of the Switch 2, and they did keep the 3.5mm headphone jack. Then here is the game card slot. Now this is a little bit different than on the original Switch model. You actually have to insert your fingernail here at the back and just kind of lift straight up. You'll kind of notice that there is this metal connector here. This is just to kind of help hold the cartridge in place. Now, the original Nintendo Switch didn't have this, and it just kind of seems a little bit more premium feeling to me. Now let's move to the bottom of the device, where you're going to have your intake as well as the USB-C port that is used primarily for docking to the Nintendo Switch 2 dock. So now let's take a look at the Joy-Cons themselves, and in order to do that, I'm actually going to separate them from the unit. Doing that is actually very simple. There is a magnetic system in play here as opposed to the slide-in attachment of the original Nintendo Switch. There are release mechanisms right here on the back of the Joy-Con. Now, in order to disconnect them, you just push the button away from the device and the Joy-Con will pop right out. So let's start with the left Joy-Con. Up here you have the bumper and the trigger. This is L and ZL, and these are digital triggers. They're not analog. They just have a 0 and a 1. So let's take a quick second and let's hear how they sound. That's the trigger, and that's the bumper. They have a light click to them, but they're not actually very loud at all. They're not bad. And then you have the directional buttons here and your screen capture button. Now, I'm not going to do the Contra test or the Street Fighter test because they will automatically fail with these being separate buttons. I really do prefer a D-pad. I never did like these separate buttons, but for now, I'm just going to have to deal because there are no third-party Joy-Con options available at time of recording. And then there's the joysticks here. Now, these are a little bit better than on the original Nintendo Switch, but they are still not the best out there. They still are on the small side. They are a little bit bigger. Travel seems to be okay for what you're expecting. During gameplay, I really didn't have much of a problem with it, but I also don't play games that require excessive use of the joysticks like shooters and all that. And then if you look at the top, you have SL and SR, you have a sync button, and then you can see that magnetic connection here. And then there's also a sensor for you to use the Joy-Con in mouse mode. And that looks like an optical sensor that you would see on the bottom of a regular Windows or Mac mouse. And then on the back, you have just this very flat feel that I never liked with the original Joy-Cons, and I don't care for this here as well. Then the right Joy-Con, very similar, except you have your home button and your capture button. You have the same optical sensor, you have the same magnetic connection, you have the same SL and SR, the same flat back. Let's just go ahead and test the face buttons here. Now they do have just a little bit of travel to them. They do seem to be a dome switch connection. That means that they're going to have a little bit of a click, but they're going to be very responsive. So let's go ahead and test the face button noise. I actually don't think you're going to have an issue with waking anybody up playing this at night next to a spouse or a significant other. They do have a click to them, but it's not a loud, annoying click. It's more of a soft, gentle click. Now let's go back to the tablet itself and let's take a look at the kickstand. Now, I don't really care for the fact that this is a thin piece. I much prefer what they did with the original Switch OLED and have it be one piece here at the bottom. And I'm not quite sure why they opted to go with this kind of U-shaped kickstand. It feels flimsy to me. Now it is tight enough that you're not going to have any flimsy movement, or it's not going to be like the original Nintendo Switch kickstand where that thing was just a tiny piece of plastic. This thing will hold the Switch pretty well, but I can see if you're rough or you have kids that are rough that this may break or snap if mishandled or not used properly. It just doesn't seem sturdy to me. It does go all the way back, so you can prop this up at different angles depending on your use case or how you're looking at this and playing in tabletop mode. And you're also going to slot your MicroSD express card here at the bottom. And when the kickstand is closed, it's also going to protect the MicroSD card. Now let's just take a quick look at the side connection. This is what the inside of the unit looks like when a Joy-Con is not connected. So you can see that there's kind of a magnetic attachment here that matches the connection on the respective Joy-Con, and everything's color-coded. So you have the minus symbol here to kind of match with the minus button on the Joy-Con itself. So there's no way to confuse or accidentally put a Joy-Con in the wrong place because everything's color-coded and everything's also form-fitted. And when you go to put the Joy-Con in, it'll just snap into place. There's no sliding, there's no mechanism here, there's just a snap in and snap out. It's actually very simple and very intuitive to use. Now, the Nintendo Switch 2 is different from what I usually cover on this channel because technically it is a mainline console. However, the Nintendo Switch line gets kind of a pass because it technically is a retro handheld along the lines of something like a Steam Deck or an ROG Ally. It's a handheld PC that just happens to be limited to Nintendo's ecosystem. So let's put the Nintendo Switch 2 up against some other handheld PCs, starting with the Steam Deck OLED. Now, when the Steam Deck came out, it was advertised as kind of a Nintendo Switch killer because you can actually play PC games directly on it. As the Steam Deck's chipset has aged, however, I would estimate that its performance is more in line with the Switch 2 now. However, there are some key differences to keep in mind when comparing these two handhelds. You could buy the Steam Deck OLED with up to a 1TB hard drive, and it can also take microSD cards up to 2TB. You also have a 7.4-inch OLED panel compared to the Switch 2 7.9-inch LCD panel, and the Switch 2 will only take microSD express cards. Now, my journey to get my hands on one of these microSD express cards was an interesting one. I first ordered a 128GB express card from Amazon, and this one was made by SanDisk, and it cost me a whopping $60. This price seemed absolutely criminal to me, considering I can get a 1TB microSD card for the Steam Deck for around the same price. I eventually found a 256GB SD card from Walmart for about $35, which is slightly more palatable. This means I only have a total of 512 gigabytes of storage on my Switch 2. However, because I upgraded my Steam Deck OLED to a 2TB hard drive and also have a 1TB microSD card, I have 3TB of storage on the Steam Deck. When setting up my Switch 2, because of the lower storage, I ended up deleting a ton of games that I had on my Switch 1 because I just couldn't fit them on this console. Game storage requirements are not going down either. No Man's Sky's storage requirement is just the same on Switch as it is on Steam Deck. You might be encouraged to grab more physical games than digital games. However, not all physical game cards are really physical. Some cards are just for game activation and don't actually contain the full game, meaning you still have to download the full game onto the system storage. Thankfully, Cyberpunk 2077 doesn't do this, but I still have 3GB of data for Cyberpunk taking up space on my SD card. Now let's compare the screens. The Switch 2 has a 7.9-inch LCD panel versus a 7.4-inch OLED panel on the Steam Deck. Now, if we compare these two screens, I really don't see much of a change or much of a big deal with Nintendo's decision to go with an LCD panel, even if I compare it directly to the Nintendo Switch OLED. Yes, the colors pop a little bit more on the OLED panel, but the Switch 2 is pretty darn close. If I have to choose between a bigger screen or an OLED panel, generally I'll choose a bigger screen for AAA titles. However, if I'm playing older games, I prefer something like the AYN Odin 2 Portal. This has one of the best 7-inch OLED panels out there. I'll generally use this for some light Switch 1 gaming, but also for local game streaming and cloud gaming. It's a completely different beast from the Switch 2, which I plan on using primarily for first-party titles like Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda. Which unfortunately is another point against the Switch 2. When the original Switch was the only game in town, I was excited when games were ported to Switch because it would mean we could just play them on the go. With the advent of other handheld PCs, such as the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally X, it's much harder to justify purchasing a game on Switch when Steam and GOG versions are so much cheaper. For example, I played Witcher 3 on the Nintendo Switch because I wanted to play it on the go, and I beat that game well before I owned a Steam Deck. However, the experience was not stellar. The frame rate was low, the resolution was 540p in handheld mode, but I dealt with it. On the Steam Deck, the same game would run at an 800p resolution at higher settings and can meet or surpass 30 frames per second. Also, The Witcher 3 is frequently on sale on Steam and GOG, so you could pay much less than the $60 that it still costs today on the Nintendo Switch. Given the $450 starting price point of the Switch 2, a Steam Deck really seems to be the better choice if you're into third-party games and don't really care about Nintendo properties. That said, on the Switch 2, The Witcher 3 runs so much better even though it doesn't have an official Switch 2 update. The Switch 2 screen now rests at a 1080p resolution. This means that Switch games will run in docked mode on the Switch 2 when in handheld mode, forcing The Witcher 3 to play on the screen at least a 720p resolution, but there may even be some potential upscaling here. I hope this gets a Switch 2 update because another CD Projekt Red game, Cyberpunk 2077, got a complete edition on the Switch, and in the little time I've had with it, I've honestly been impressed with how well it runs. Because this is a complete game with all the DLC, and I don't have the DLC on Steam, I'll likely play this game on Switch 2 like I played Witcher 3 on Switch 1. CD Projekt Red also put the entirety of their game on the cartridge, so there's not much overhead taking up precious space on the Nintendo Switch or the SD card itself. You'll generally find that if a game has an actual Nintendo Switch 2 update, it will perform much better than on the original Switch, which may inspire you to want to play that game again. I put down The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom a long time ago because there were other games I would rather have played at the time, and the performance is definitely much better with the Switch 2 Edition update. Frame rate is very consistent, and I feel like now is a good time to go back and actually finish this game. The same goes for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I put these games down because I just got sick of them running like absolute butt. If you look around in the starting area on the Switch 1, everything just looks choppy. However, on the Switch 2, things look amazing. The Pokemon animations are smooth, as well as the camera movement. Even changing outfits is great. There used to be a ton of loading in between screens, but on the Switch 2, this game is finally playing the way it was supposed to. It only took 3 years and a whole new system to do it, but it happened. Now let's talk about the docked mode experience. Unfortunately, at time of this recording, you can only use the official Nintendo Switch 2 dock, and you can only use the AC adapter that comes in the box. To me, this is a letdown for several reasons. There are 2 places I dock my Switch, here in the studio and in the living room. The Switch 1 dock will not work with the Switch 2 and vice versa. But in addition, third-party solutions won't work either. Unlike the Steam Deck, which will work on any HDMI out dock, the Switch 2's top port doesn't even have video out. This puts me in a very expensive position, because at time of recording, the only place where you can get an official Nintendo Switch 2 dock is from Nintendo's online store direct at $120. Everything with this handheld is just expensive and nickel and diming you into spending as much money as you possibly have to just to be able to play Nintendo games. That said, I didn't buy the Switch 2 Pro controller because the Switch 1 Pro controllers work just fine. Other third-party controllers will work as well. The Gamester Supernova is one such controller. You can actually plug the charging cradle into the USB-C port on the side of the Switch 2 dock, or you could plug it into the top USB-C port. As long as USB controller connections are turned on in the Switch settings, this controller will work just fine. Now, some 8-bit Do controllers will work on the Switch 2, but they require a firmware update. For example, this one I got from Acnis for review. I'm going to be doing a controller review on this a little bit later. This is advertised for Windows and Android. And so updating the firmware on this didn't do anything because this is not compatible with Nintendo Switch. However, this Bluetooth Ultimate 2C controller that Acnis also provided me and that I did do a review on will work on the Nintendo Switch 2 once we update the firmware. So if you have a compatible 8-bit Do controller, you need to find the appropriate firmware updater. So I'll provide a link in the description to this site, and then once you get there, you need to find your specific controller. So in my case, we need the Ultimate 2C controller, and we're going to click Firmware Updater. Now, your mileage may vary, but in my case, it directed me to download 8-bit Do Ultimate Software 2. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and what it's going to do is download the file. So let's go ahead and go into the Downloads directory, and we're going to right-click this file here, and we're going to click Extract All. Go ahead and follow the prompts, and then let's open the extracted folder. We're going to be prompted to open up Ultimate Software v2. You may need to get past this firewall warning. Let's just click Run anyway. Now from here, we need to put our controller into a recovery mode. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold the L and R buttons, and then we're going to press and hold the home button until the red light at the top starts blinking. Once that happens, we should be able to plug our controller directly into our computer, and we're going to get a prompt as to which controller we have, and then click Update. And as you can see here, we are on version 1.01, and if we look at the log, it says added support for Switch 2. So let's go ahead and click Update. You'll get the notification that it's updating, and once the update is complete, we can go home. We'll notice that it's no longer connected because it's on in the new firmware. Once we go ahead and sync this up with the Nintendo Switch 2, you're going to find that everything just works perfectly. So if you have an 8-bit Do controller you want to use with the Switch 2, just double check to make sure that it's compatible, and then do a quick firmware update by going to the support page. You can also take off the Magnetic Joy-Con 2 controllers and connect them to the included controller attachment in order to play games that way. The docked experience is about what you would expect, except now the dock supports 4K. If you have a 4K TV or monitor, you'll find that games will output or upscale to that resolution. For another accessory that I bought for the Switch 2 was a Savage Raven Skull & Co case. I got this because I absolutely hate the ergonomics on the Switch 2. It's flat and it's uncomfortable. I also ordered a Satisfy grip that is dockable, but they didn't ship that to me in time for Switch 2's launch, and I probably won't have that until next month. In the meantime, the case here is going to hold me over. It's not dockable though, so I have to take it off every time I want to play in docked mode. When in handheld mode, however, it provides the added grip necessary for me to be able to enjoy the device without my hand cramping up. Alright, let's wrap things up with my final thoughts, starting with the positives. I love the screen on the Nintendo Switch 2. I find it's the perfect size for handheld gaming and the best screen on a Nintendo Switch to date. It may not be OLED, but it's still pretty darn good. Switch 1 games are also much more performant with Switch 2 updates, and native Switch 2 games are currently keeping up as well. The system is also plug and play. It's not necessarily a device for tinkerers. It's for people who just want to boot a game and play without any worries about setting up emulators or toggling settings to manage frame rates. It just works, and that speaks volumes to a lot of gamers out there. Now, for the first time on this channel, before I go into the negatives, I want to talk about a neutral aspect about the Nintendo Switch 2, and that's battery life. This system has a very small battery. However, it advertises 2 to 6 hours of battery life. This is on par with most handheld PCs out there that have much bigger batteries. That's because there's no operating system overhead, and that custom NVIDIA chip must really be putting in some efficiency work. Now, I didn't fully test the battery because I'm used to only getting 2 hours when playing a heavier game on a handheld anyway. I don't think the battery life will bother that many people necessarily. Now, onto the negatives, and there are quite a few. This handheld is pricey all around. It's just a nickel and dime show. Need a second dock? Expect to pay a ton. Need a Pro controller? Expect to pay. Games? Still expensive. Yes, there's still Switch tax. Camera? Yep, that costs money too. This means that this handheld is going to cost much more than the $450 retail price it goes for. And it's basically just a better Switch 1. That means that it's just as flat and hard to hold as the original Switch 1. I really wish they made the Joy-Cons more ergonomic. But alas, here we are. I still need to buy accessories in order to be able to hold this for extended periods of time. More money. And my last 2 points have to do with the future. We're impressed now, but is the Switch 2 future-proof? Will it be able to handle performance 3 or 4 years down the line, or are we going to start to see performance issues just like we saw with the Switch 1? I'm sure first-party titles will be just fine, but just like with the Switch 1, third-party titles will work better elsewhere, like on a PS5, a handheld PC, or Windows desktop. With how expensive the Switch 2 is, if you're not interested in Nintendo titles specifically, you might just want to buy a Steam Deck, brah. I personally only bought this thing because of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Switch 2 update, as well as the Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 update. I bought this to play my own games the way they were supposed to be played instead of the janky mess we got on the original Switch. I'm not really interested in Mario Kart World, so my next big purchase for this system will most likely be Pokemon Legends ZA, which is months down the line. So I really don't anticipate supporting this system until a first-party title comes out that I really want to play. And also let me know if there are aspects of this system you would like to see me cover in future videos, like battery life or comparisons to the Steam Deck or other gaming aspects of this handheld. Please feel free to continue the conversation on the Retro Handhelds Discord, where you can find me hanging out in between videos. And if you want to support the channel like these wonderful people on the screen, you can do so by going to my Patreon page. Links for all these places are in the description. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you in any way. Every smash of that button helps the channel grow and allows me to get more content out to you. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.